Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. In the Gospel of John, the very first miracle that Jesus ever performs is this miracle at the wedding in Cana. A miracle that is the transformation of water, something so ordinary and that we often take for granted, into wine, a gift that is to be savored, something that aids in celebration, something that makes us glad. Incidentally, I recently had a conversation with someone who said that they learned how to have dinner party etiquette with wine from this very passage in the gospel, that you serve the best wine first, and then you save the not so great wine for later, after the guests have had a couple glasses of the good wine first. But at the heart of this miracle is the ability that Jesus has, the way that God moves into our lives to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Over the course of his ministry, Jesus would demonstrate this capacity over and over again. People he met had their eyes open to God's grace in the world, working through those things that before they had taken for granted. It happens over and over again in Jesus' ministry, until his own death is transformed into a miracle for all people. This is one of the principles at the heart of our Christian faith. We confess and believe that God transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary all the time. And if someone were to ask me if I believe in miracles, I would say absolutely. Not because I take it simply on faith, because it's here in the Bible, but because the Bible has taught me to see God's hand at work in the world around me, to see those miracles that happen right in front of my very eyes. This Sunday, we honor the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., something we do each and every year together as a society in this country and as a church, the spiritual body. We come to honor his legacy not only in the realm of civil rights, but the fact that he drew on his faith to power an entire movement that transformed society. As the church, we remember that Dr. King believed in miracles, and that he learned this from his own faith. And we celebrate the fact that we have such an amazing role model, someone to point us in a direction when we feel that things have gotten dark and are about to overwhelm us. If Dr. King didn't have faith, if Dr. King had not believed that the water can be transformed into wine, then the course of our own national history would have been different. So in this time when we're still fighting 60 years later, we gather not only to remember what he did, but to take energy and power from his own example to lead our own lives in our time. You know, Dr. King's favorite quotes from the Bible was taken from the book of Amos. He used it over and over again in his I Have a Dream speech, in his letter from a Birmingham jail. It's that famous line, "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream." The ancient prophet Amos was speaking out about injustices in his own time, some 700 years before Jesus was even born. And here we are, millennia later, and we're still fighting for justice. What this means is that the struggle for equality, the struggle for the dignity for every human being is not something that can be simply accomplished and tied up and said that this project is over. No. Each successive generation must face the challenges of the society in which they find themselves and draw on the spiritual power that God has given us to do this work. God will give us the power. God will give us the will. God will give us the skills and the talents and the resources to accomplish this work in our own time. Our job for now is simply to show up and to do the work and to witness to the miracles that God does in our midst. Now, there's another part to this gospel story in the Gospel of John, the one about the transforming of water into wine. You might have noticed that when Jesus was about to perform the miracle, he asked the servants to fill the jars with water because they were empty. There's no way that the miracle could have occurred, of course, had the jars been empty. That's a lot like the work that we have to do. We must keep our water jars full. We must keep them full with that water that Dr. King calls upon to roll down, and that righteousness that must be filled each and every day. When we keep those water jars filled, then we allow God to work through them to cause miracles to happen in our midst. It may not be the most glamorous work. It may not be the most satisfying work in our own time. And for many of us, like Dr. King, we won't see the fruits of our labors, perhaps even in our own lifetime. But we do it in faith. We do it in trust. We do it knowing that God is going to do something with our efforts that we can't even imagine right now. That's the work that Dr. King did. And that's the work that 60 years later, we must still be up to. Let's be honest. America in 2022 is very different from America in the time of Dr. King. And yet, even in spite of all that progress, we all know that we are still fighting. We are still fighting for racial justice. We are still fighting for those waters to roll down. We are still fighting for righteousness in our own time. Whether it's issues like voting rights or the racial discrimination in our police and carceral system in this country, or just the desire for you to live your life each and every day like a normal person, without all of those microaggressions that racial injustice imbues in our society. We're still fighting. We're not done. But the promise was never that we would be done once and for all. The promise is that when we fill those water jars, Jesus will come along and transform them into wine. It may not even be that wine that we ourselves drink at this time, but it will happen. It will happen because God deems it so. So on this Martin Luther King Sunday, we must remember. We must remember to keep those water jars filled. The issues are so vast and so complex in our society. They touch every single issue and every aspect of how we live together as a people. Racial injustice is an illness that has infected the entire body of our country. And it is naive to think that in just a year or two, or even a generation or two, that we could undo 400 years of injustice. It touches everything from education to security, to the way that the government works, to the way that income and wealth are distributed in our country. So it can be daunting and difficult to imagine what we as individuals can do to make a difference. Perhaps this Sunday you're sitting here and wondering, what can I do? Of course, I know, even as I look out at this congregation and know the people who are joining us online, that so many of you dedicate your entire lives to working for justice and to making a change. You do it using the own particular gifts and talents that you have. And it is inspiring to know that we as a church come together Sunday after Sunday to bring those talents together, to thank God for the gifts that we have been given, and to strive and encourage each other in those gifts. And that's why I'd like to say that if you're ever wondering what you can do to make a difference, I think that showing up right here in this place is one of those things. I might be a little naive, but I truly think that there is nothing like a congregation of people of goodwill gathered around this work, gathered around God to make a difference. And not only that, but All Saints Church is a special place. We are a self-defined, multiracial congregation, and that is something so precious. You know, in the time of Dr. King, a place like All Saints was almost unimaginable, and so few of them existed anywhere in the United States. It's sad to say that in 2022, 10 a.m. on Sunday morning is still one of the most segregated times in all of the week. We segregate ourselves not only based on race, but also based on language, on ethnic background, on economic background, on political beliefs, on immigration status. The list goes on and on. And even in a place like New York City, where churches sit right on top of each other, we still manage to move ourselves into different little corners when it comes time to pray. Friends, there is nothing like coming together with your brothers, sisters, and siblings Sunday after Sunday to pray, to sing, to worship, to be together as the people of God, especially when we all look different and come from different backgrounds. When you do this over time, your heart and your spirit are transformed, because the stories and the burdens and the joys of the people among whom you sit in these pews become your own stories and burdens and joys. And once that happens, you can no longer be indifferent to any injustice that happens to one member of your spiritual family. When we come together as a church, God is knitting us together in ways that we can't even see in front of our very own eyes. Instead, God is showing us something different, something new in our own lives. God touches a part of us and activates empathy and love and caring for people that might have been strangers otherwise. It is a beautiful and a miraculous thing. We take it very seriously here at All Saints Church. Because of the strong leadership of our lay people, we have a commitment to racial justice. You can see it in our racial justice statement on our website, and that goes out in every single communication that we have. You can see it in work that we have done, like our story sharing program last Lent, which will be coming back this coming Lent. You can see it in our investigation and evaluation of our liturgical practices and our sacred space, and the work of our Racial Justice Initiative, which is ongoing. You know, one thing that we've learned is that even when people are all on the same page about what direction we're going, the work of racial justice still takes a very long time. It is tedious. It is difficult. And yet we keep coming back, because we know it is at the heart of our faith and our values. And it's the only way that we can live out our mission to truly be the people of God. On this Martin Luther King Sunday, as we hear this story of Jesus transforming the water into wine, I urge you to keep your water jars filled. When they're feeling dry or when they're empty, go to the source. Go to wherever it is that you know that you can find that water, whether it's here in this church or in your community and your network, or in the foods and the traditions that you celebrate in your own home. Let those jars be filled. Because when the waters begin to roll down and justice begins to sprout up in the land, we will know that God has been on our side for all time. Amen.